Hello, welcome to the live, and good to be back again this week. Today, I want to approach a question that I asked you all on my social media accounts, and it's a question. I just want to give the background to where it came from. When is enough enough when it comes to language learning? Now, I very deliberately don't tell you when I raise these questions why I'm asking them, where they're from, what I'm thinking when I ask them, what the impetus is, what the sort of influence from my side is when I ask them. And I do that for a few reasons, mostly because I enjoy seeing different thoughts and theories and ideas, things that I'm not considering. It helps me to open, as soon as you open a question up, and you try not to prescribe what the answer should be or could be, you get to hear a lot of very different views and opinions that you maybe hadn't considered. And this is something I really appreciate in life generally. I much prefer to get an authentic response based on people's experiences, based on people's own situations. And if I stop prescribing something to that question where I'm putting in my thought or my idea or whatever else, then what happens is I get back something that's sort of tinted or colored towards that. And that's definitely way less richer for me than getting your thoughts just raw. And usually I don't go into why I did this before I answer the questions, but today I want to, because I think it's important to sort of to frame this a little bit from the outset, and then we'll have a look at some of the things that you've commented, and then as usual we'll look at the questions that you have, whether it's about the topic or not, but I will prioritize the ones about the topic first, obviously. So this question that when is enough comes on the back of a few things for me. The very first thing is the first Polyglot Conference that we had in 2013, which is like 10 years ago now. And one of the things that we celebrated, because it was in Budapest, it was in Hungary, and one of the things we celebrated was Catalan, who was a famous polyglot who had a book written and translated into different languages, including English. And one of the quotations that's translated into English is, "A language is the only thing worth knowing, even poorly." Now, this is something that's been repeated and put on screens and shared by many, many people in the language learning community, particularly by polyglots. Why is that? And I think it's possibly because when we like multiple languages, we tend to almost collect them like Pokemon sometimes. And we can be guilty of that. And sometimes I can myself feel this draw to just keep grabbing more and more and explore more languages. And even though the intention isn't that it's a Pokemon game where you try and collect them all, it can appear that way. It can sometimes even feel that way. And the criticism that you can get as somebody who does that is that you don't really get to know each individual language well enough or deeply enough, and therefore you're not really truly experiencing the whole language and its culture in the same way as somebody who dives really deep. Now, I don't disagree with that critique. I think it's a valid critique of the situation. However, it's not the only thing, right? So whenever we talk about language learning, or whenever we talk about many things in life, I think probably most things, any decision we make, there is some give and take. There's a reaction and a consequence to what we do and what we decide. And so the consequence or the reaction that you have for studying several languages, for example, is that you get to see where languages cross over. You potentially get to, well, potentially, not necessarily if you study very, very different languages, but you potentially get to see where languages cross over and meet in the middle. You get to feel how they feel different in your head, to be able to communicate to a certain level. What you don't get is obviously the depth of the one or any of the languages necessarily. But the question then becomes, do you need that? So when is enough for you? And that is definitely a question of how much do I study? Why do I study it? And what are the reasons why? What are the benefits to me? What's the reaction? And what are the consequences that I want over other consequences? So the consequences of studying a language very deeply are that if you get a very deep knowledge of a language and then you move away from that subject area and you move to something else, it is harder to retain the detailed knowledge, because you need to be talking about it, discussing it, to keep that current in your brain, to keep it at your fingertips, to be able to use it and manipulate it whenever you want. Same is true for language at almost any level, but it is more complicated as soon as you sort of have so many things. This is where you see also people who are educated first language speakers of a language, then move and live in a different country and work through a new language. And then when they go back to their original language that they grew up speaking, were educated in, they can find it slightly challenging to speak in a way that people of the country now, because remember, the country has moved on as well. There's a consequence to that action of moving to the new country, and that is that you don't necessarily stay up to date with how the language is spoken now, and also you can get rusty depending on the language. The internet helps to minimize that, but that was always an issue for years and years and years and years. It can be mitigated by the internet and by connections in that way, but there are always these things. Whenever you study a new language, the decision of what you do and how far you go has an impact on your life in other areas. And being aware and conscious of that and accepting those consequences, and it comes to a balance of, am I happier with the consequences of doing that, or would I prefer not to and not have the consequences and continue, and then possibly feel that I've missed out on something by not learning the language, or can I carry on very happily? So this is the first thing that I want to sort of preface, this idea of a bit of a language being better than nothing. Now, that's where people will disagree. The reason this sort of came up for me again was we had Speak Gaelic Week, was it last week? And at the end of it, in fact, it was last Sunday, I think, I posted one thing about Gaelic, because I've been studying Gaelic, not hugely seriously, but I've been studying it, and not very intensively, but for maybe about a year or so, maybe a bit longer. My Gaelic isn't particularly good, but I enjoy learning it and I enjoy continuing to learn it. But it's a slow burn for me, definitely a slow burn. Now, there's a phrase in Gaelic that I shared, which I thought was pretty encouraging on the face of it. And that phrase is Ishara Gaelic Vrishte na Gaelic Sahishte, which literally means better broken Gaelic than Gaelic in the coffin. So it's better to know a little bit than none at all. And also, there's a very strong thing with that, though, where it kind of is similar to what Catalome said, better a bit than a little than none. But there's more to it. That phrase for Gaelic, Gaelic in the coffin, is basically like saying, it almost gives you a feeling, I think, of as a learner, of if you don't do it a little bit, then Gaelic dies. And there was a reply to this that sort of made me reevaluate this phrase. And that comment was, I've heard it and its Irish counterpart, used mostly by learners as an excuse to stop improving, to settle with English phonology, English idiom without acquiring much grammar. Of course, it's still better than no Gaelic at all. The job's done. So instead of it being necessarily seen by a speaker as a positive thing, it can be seen in some language communities as actually an excuse or even a negative thing. And when we're talking about Indigenous, endangered, and vulnerable languages, we need to be, I think, a little bit more careful when we talk about this idea of enough is how much ever you want, and just have fun with it. And this is all fine when you're talking about languages that have been used around the world, because the origins of those languages are from colonizers from before. So English, French, Spanish, German, Dutch. These are all languages that have been exported and imposed on different peoples around the world. And so I think those languages are fair game. Portuguese as well. They're all fair game. And those languages don't necessarily belong to any one community. They belong to many communities around the world. But when you talk about indigenous, endangered, and vulnerable languages that have not been exported and imposed on other peoples in the same way, and especially when those languages are suffering either because they don't get funding, or they are neglected, or they are languages that need support. When you go to those communities and you are genuine in your endeavors to improve and learn, what my experience has been that people are very happy that you're doing that. So I've been doing this recently with Cornish. In the last 3 years, I've been studying Cornish, and I found the Cornish language community to be very welcoming. Um, I have to be very honest and say that in the beginning they were a little bit suspicious, because typically the likes of me, people like me, would go and learn multiple languages. And whilst that's okay for certain languages that are national languages, languages that have got lots of things written about them and things in them, there's not that danger in the same way. But when it gets to a language where you're talking about, lower numbers of speakers compared to other languages that are neglected in many different ways, this can feel almost, I guess, kind of, you're not taking us too seriously because you're just learning a bit. And now I'm kind of in two minds in this whole thing, because there is no one answer to this. There's no right, wrong, completely, because the intentions can still be good to learn a bit of a language. So I still believe in the Catalan way of thinking of a bit of a language is better than none, as a general rule. I think the thing that we need to consider is when we're getting into languages where the indigenous, endangered, and vulnerable language groups and communities, we need to be more sensitive to the feelings and the history and to the wishes of those communities. So when is enough actually isn't a question that we on our own get to answer necessarily. I think it needs to be a question that we talk to other speakers and people who learn it as well. So I think that both of those reactions from the person who reacted to that thing that I shared on Twitter, I think absolutely I can understand where that comes from, and I think that it's a valid point of view. And when it comes to the idea of Catalan and learning a bit of the language and encouraging people to do that, I also agree with that, and I see where it comes from, and I believe that both of these come from good places. So that was where I was coming from this, which I guess is a little bit deeper than maybe many of you thought that I was going to go. But this is kind of where I was in my thinking. And as somebody who, with the Polyglot Conference and with the language event, I strive to support and encourage and give platforms to indigenous, endangered, and vulnerable languages, because I think they need that more than, say, some national languages that would get a lot more support, whether locally or internationally. It depends on the situation. But I think that these languages are worthy of giving a platform and for having their voices heard more. So in terms of that work that I do and the work that I spend my time trying to improve the situation in terms of giving that platform and the voice to the people who speak on their behalf. I can't speak for them, but what I can do is give a platform and help by helping to make resources possible. And that's one thing I enjoy doing, and I like to do. It fulfills me. It makes me feel good to do that, because it feels worthwhile to me. But I can't do that in all good faith without considering what that means, how I'm perceived, but also what it means when you're learning the languages as well. And so, when I took on Cornish 3 years ago, I had no idea where I was going with it. And the more I've got into it, the more I've understood how important it is to actually go forward and take it quite seriously and continue to study. And I'm not going to be rushing through Cornish, and I'm not going to be trying to get to this crazy level of fluency. If it's even possible for me, I don't know. In a very short amount of time, it will be something that is a slow burn. But my plan is to continue on with it until I complete all of the exams and beyond, and I can be a useful, functioning member of the Cornish language community to be able to help. Creating Wikipedia articles with them, to maybe even write things in Cornish. And one day, maybe, that might be a possibility in other languages too. But for now, getting to improve my Irish and my Gaelic as well is also important to me. Those communities are different, and there's a different vibe and a different thing about them compared to Cornish. So I can't do everything and be everything all at once, but I want to do as much as I can, and I want to focus my attention particularly on those languages and walk the walk, talk the talk. I don't want to just speak and have what we call here bosh moabit, which means that, like, empty conversation. I want my words to have meaning and to mean something. So that's where I was coming from. Now, I love that the questions, the comments I got back were on this topic were really good, because they talked about the other side of what it means to learn a language, and so Timothy Douglas, who's wonderful, wonderful guy. If you're not following him, please do. He's lovely. And he said to me, personally, I never reached the point of thinking actively, is this enough? But other languages distract me so much that I sometimes stop. Now, that is exactly what I was discussing in the beginning, right? That this thing where you're almost like this, I call it the magpie effect, where you see something shiny and bright, and you don't want to leave the other thing. It's not that you don't like it anymore, but you get distracted and go off to the other thing. And this happens quite a lot in the language learning community, particularly. So I absolutely get that. I get that, Timothy. Absolutely. Let me see. Derek also says that obviously a moving target, day by day, week by week, month by month, the conundrum. It is difficult to know when is enough for you. And in the language learning therapy sessions that I run, we talk about this quite a lot. We talk about language learning in the context of our lives, in the context of our individuality, of our individual situations. Now, I understand that, we're at a point in history where people are needing to band together to get rights and recognition for lots and lots of different groups. The reality in the world is that we're all individuals, and just because one person belongs to 1, 2, 3, 4 different groups, actually you are you. And just because you happen to have a skin color, a religion, a sexuality, or whatever, or gender, whatever identity you have, as far as I'm concerned, I think we all have those things that we attach to groups, and I think it's a positive thing. What it doesn't do is it doesn't define you as an individual completely, because, and when it comes to language learning, you are a multifaceted being, and whatever your beliefs, background, whatever you have, that it's part of you and maybe an important part for you in your identity at certain times. The actual fact that you are an individual and that we need to talk about what's going on with you and what's right for you is the important thing. Because if you've got, a family or a dependent that you have to look after, and you've got a full-time job and you're working and you've got, sort of commute time, none of the other things actually make the big difference to that. The fact is that you have all of these things going on. If you have mental health concerns, or if you have a disability, all of these things enter into the pot as to what's possible and how we make changes and differences. So this is why I'm a great believer in when is enough is enough does not just mean when is enough of the language, when is it enough for the community, but I would add in the dimension of when is it enough for you as an individual, and what is enough for you, and what do you need to do to reach where you feel it's enough for you. So, people will say, and I've got comments as well from Santiago. It's a great topic, and Polyglot Journey. Mike is saying, that it's never enough. The more, the better. And I think that I can kind of get on board with the idea of we can continue learning forever in a day, and it is nice. I personally love the idea, and I really hope that I will get to an age where I just can keep continuing to learn and until the day I die. There's so much to learn. It never ends, right? At the same time, I don't want to feel stressed out because I'm not doing something, or because I'm not meeting somebody else's expectations. And I think this is where there's a huge balance to be had. Whether those expectations are external, from communities, from individuals, from comparing ourselves to people online that we perceive as doing certain things or having certain things or being able to do certain things, or whether they are things that we put on ourselves, stress and pressure that we put on ourselves, right? Like, I need to be better, I can do better, I can do this, I can do that. All of this stuff that we do to ourselves, it's super, super important that we minimize that and that we feel happy with what we're doing and we make peace. And I want to come back to what I started with talking about with this idea of the sort of the reactions and the consequences for what we choose to do and choose not to do, because they're important. So I could choose, for example, to meet the needs of an external agent, a group, a community, whatever, and not feel that I'm disappointing somebody or disappointing myself by continuing on a path that I recognize actually has health implications for me, stops me doing my job properly, stops me looking after my dependents properly, stops me from doing other things I enjoy properly. Or I can make peace with a slower pace, so I don't keep going up all the time really fast. Slower pace, slides across, slight dips, ups and downs, and make peace with that, because overall I feel more content, more at peace, happier with my life and how it's going. And it's super, super important, I feel, to recognize all of these things. So when is enough enough? I mean, people have some very strong feelings on this. I mean, one of the things is, you know, language learning is like breathing. And these are strong comparisons. Mitchell says, I prefer thinking in terms of yin and yang. We live in a world where we need to cultivate the Taoist art, not doing. Even in language learning, social media has mostly been unhelpful in this regard. Yeah, you see, these are some of the thoughts that I agree with. That it can, for some of us, it can be like breathing. We can't imagine not doing it, and that's fine. For others, it will feel actually I need space and time. It's fine to have other interests and other things that you want to do or need to do. It's also fine. There's not one right answer to this. And you know, oh, do excuse me. And there's this idea of your goals and when you're fluent. And Jason sort of mentions this of when are you fluent? When do you feel comfortable? What are the local, what's your goal for this? Why are you doing it? Well, those things are the only things that you can answer for yourself. If you're learning something because you need it for something specific, then it comes down to how you feel about that. And is it right for you to stop at a certain point because you don't necessarily need to talk about all of these things that you're learning vocabulary for? Or do you just want to go on holiday to Greece and sit at a table by the beach or by the seaside and order a drink and a meal, and that's it? I mean, there's nothing wrong with doing that. So that could be enough. Some people answered this question with how much is enough in terms of studying. So from a different perspective, 15 minutes a day is enough to learn a lot within a few months. See, it depends on your language goal, and your learning never really stops. That's Tom Koi. I'm sorry if I pronounced that incorrectly. I was going for a Maori, Tom Koi, friend in, sorry, you in Maori. But yeah, I mean, these are really interesting things of talking about what your goals are. Is 15 minutes enough? So you can even look at this question as what's enough in terms of your time that you dedicate. Well, this all would come back to my point on you can't expect something that is not a measurable consequence to what you've done in terms of your action. If you think of the age-old quotation of every action has an equal and opposite reaction, you can kind of use that analogy when it comes to learning as well. So, I mean, if you have a continued momentum of a certain amount of study or time dedicated to learning languages, then there's going to be a consequence to that, and that's that you're going to steadily learn the language. Depending on the language, it will be a different rate of progress that you have, because some languages require a lot more time and effort to memorize the words and internalize them and make them automatic than others, and that's just normal. So when is enough enough? Is that question even possible to answer fully and completely? To my mind, it isn't. I think it's a question that just has to hang in the air, and it's a question that we need to keep asking ourselves. When is enough enough? And I know I make my silly jokes about enough. When's enough enough? When's an egg? But there is some really serious, there's a really serious side to the question, when is enough enough, when it comes to learning, when it comes to almost anything we do. Because when's it enough for you to live with the consequences of what you do or what you don't do? And I'm going to leave that for you to answer on your own as well. I hope going through this helped to sort of illustrate why I'm a great believer in the individual, why I'm a great believer in recognizing the groups we belong to, the life we lead on an individual basis. Because until we treat the individual and we talk about ourselves as individuals and not as necessarily members of the group we have to keep up with or do the same things as, we can belong to groups and do different things. We can belong to groups and have slightly different ways of doing things. It doesn't stop our individuality. And this is why in the language learning therapy groups, we talk about individual situations and individual choices and individual needs and individual thoughts and individual things that are going on. It just can't be generalized. in the way that I think, unfortunately, in terms of a business model, maybe not the sort of the mass production. So there is no magic pill I can sell or anyone else can sell to you as an individual. There's no one way that works. All ways can work, potentially, depending on how you respond to it and how you use it and internalize it. And so, yeah, the question remains, when's enough enough? Right. I am going to try and go through all of these questions and comments. Please excuse me for taking time to do this, but it's really important also to really do justice to the topic. And I hope I have for you. I hope I've made this feel useful. I'm very happy at the moment because I have just completed uploading the first 50 stories of Ladino on the Polyglot Conference website. If you go to polyglotconference.com and you click on, there's a stories link. I have now just uploaded less than 50. They're the link stories, but we've translated them into Ladino. So if you click on the Ladino link, you can now listen to the language in Ladino and read the text as you would on Link, but obviously not as sophisticated. I can't reproduce the Link website, but we do have permission from Steve Kaufman from Link to have them published there until they are ready to house them on the Link website itself. I hope that they will do it one day, because I think they will get greater visibility on there, and that's what they were intended to be for the Link website. But until that is possible, I hope that you will enjoy them on the Polyglot Conference website and that they will be useful for you to either look at, learn about, and Ladino being one of these languages that is in, I would say, in the vulnerable category for Indigenous, endangered and vulnerable languages. It's one of my goals to try and help promote materials and to help the language and the community if that's what they want. And in this case, they did want it, so or at least members of the community did want it. So yes. Inga, you disagree with the Catalan quote? There's lots of things that are worth knowing, even poorly, not just languages. Why would that be the only thing? I think, Inga, that the Catalan thing is that possibly, I imagine it's that sometimes if you don't know something to a certain degree for some subjects, that you can misinterpret it. On my word, I can't even speak English. You can misinterpret, and you can maybe not even fully comprehend what you're talking about. So you sort of go around in circles, or and sometimes also you can potentially think you know more than the other person, because sometimes some experts have this thing where they're wondering whether this person seems very confident in their knowledge of not knowing things. And you see this a lot online, people who are not really that confident in or don't know that much about certain topics, but they argue very, very strongly, and don't know how much they don't know. And whereas with the language, it becomes very clear very quickly that, in a conversation you can't do that in the same way. So I imagine that's the comparison that with Catalan, in terms of, because if with language, I mean, look, if you can only say hello and you can't follow the rest, you're very aware that you can't follow the rest. It's very, very obvious, right? But it's worth knowing, because at least you can say hello and it will help produce a smile and a reaction from the person. So I think that's why that quotation is rings true for many people. But I think it's fine if you don't feel that makes sense to you. I think that's fine as well. But that's my interpretation of it. Please share your experience briefly as a language consultant, and especially for beginners. Oh, so there are a couple of things here. So language consultant is something I do for my work, and I do that by consulting on multilingual projects, and that's a slightly different thing to what we're talking about here. So that's yeah, it's a work thing where a company might have a project that they want to work internationally over various cultures and languages, and I will give advice on how to make sure that you're using an even hand and taking on into consideration the different linguistic and different cultural changes that you will see across the markets, and also uh, testing people to work on those types of projects as well, and sort of giving it advice, analysis, and yeah, and support. And also when it comes to anything to do with QA for those kinds of things, that's the kind of thing I do as a language consultant. Now, in terms of talking about learning languages, then yeah, I as I say, I do this language learning therapy, and that's something that I started really during the pandemic, during the lockdown, with these lives, and then answering questions from lots of people, and then also doing. I noticed that a lot of times the questions came up that were similar, and I thought that actually what people needed was not to hear the same thing, but to hear it for their specific individual case, and that required more of a dialogue one-on-one with different people, and in groups as well, because I think that the group dynamic works very well. So they're small groups of people, and they come and they talk to me about what's going on, their goals. They will celebrate things that they've done, talk to me about difficulties that they're going through, and also share things that they've been learning. So we talk about etymology, talk about all sorts of things, and there's sort of no no sort of topic off, off the table really. We talk about lots and lots of things, and that's kind of what that is. I mean, anyone interested in joining me for that kind of thing, feel free to reach out to me on Patreon. The link is it's in the description, but also on my website at speakingfluently.com. Let me see. I think that could be said about a number of subjects. Yeah. Cool. Oh yeah. Okay. This is the same Catalan discussion. Okay, ich verstehe deine Frage jetzt gleich eben gerade nicht. Was für eine Erfahrung hatten Sie, wenn Sie zum ersten Mal auf eine Fremdsprache mit einer Muttersprache sprach? Ich verstehe die Frage nicht. Entschuldigung. Kannst du es noch mal schreiben oder vielleicht andersrum sagen oder so, in anderen Wörtern oder so? Ja, Entschuldigung. I'm not quite sure what you mean. She can still, okay, let me see. I was told to learn words and then forgot them 3 months later. Relearn them. Is this a good method? In isolation, just to learn words and then forget them, and then forget them 3 months later, doesn't sound amazing as an idea. I mean, if you're admitting that you learn and then forget them, then you're not learning the language. If you're forgetting everything, then you're not learning the language. So maybe you need to look at what else you're doing, and to maybe sort of tweak that method and add things in, maybe if as well. Oh, you speak Irish? Yeah, I speak a little bit of Irish. I've been studying it for about 2 years, and I can understand quite a lot of like sort of basic text and stuff. The stuff I'm doing now is around about, I think, A2 B1-ish level, roughly. That's what I'm reading and listening to. And it's amazing because you can kind of I can follow quite a lot of stuff that I read for the course, but and sometimes in the wild as well, I'll hear some Irish now and or read it and I can make it out. It's not like complete nonsense to me. It means something to me. But speaking it, because I don't really get to speak it very often to anyone. I'm not particularly good at speaking it, but I mean, I can say things in Irish for sure. You want to learn it too one day. So Eric, what I did is I a shout out to Donovan, actually. So Donovan, the Mezzofanti Guild, he wrote a really good blog post on learning Irish and his journey. And from there, I found Rangana, which is Ranganna, the Rangana site, which means literally lessons in Irish. And I went through the first level of that, and then I'm going through the second level of that. That's been my kind of core. I've also worked with Patricia McEwen, who I did the videos with. So she has a website as well. Another person that I recommend in terms of the quality of materials is Molly. So Irish with Molly, she's great. So I use a lot of the stuff. I follow her on TikTok and Instagram, and I love the things she puts out as well. She also does courses. And then there's a course on TikTok as well with a guy called Buzz who does Ulster Irish, and that's something I've also done some of that. So yeah, it's a long process, but it's slowly starting to fall into place. Slowly but surely. I think most people don't speak some foreign language not because of the lack of knowledge in the languages, but they are hesitating to take their first step. Kindly open up your mind on this. Absolutely, people have various reasons why they don't speak a language. Very often there are psychological reasons why. People feel self-conscious. People have many reasons why they don't want to or feel that they can't speak straight away. So there are many reasons why that could be. Again, a lot of these could be very individual reasons as well. And it depends on languages and backgrounds and all sorts of things can go into this. Have you ever tried to learn the language of the local Romani people there in Skopje? Yes, yes, I have. There are, in fact, there's not one. There are many. So learning them all would be fairly difficult. But I do have a Macedonian Romani dictionary here, and I have. Whenever there's a book fair and they have a Romani stand, I buy the books. I don't necessarily study it actively, and I'm not at the moment. I have had periods where I've studied it, but to be honest, it's not always easy to get to practice it here. I do sometimes get to use bits, and there are some Romani speakers who do greet me in Romani in the city who know that I have an awareness of the language, so they speak to me and greet me in Romani. But generally speaking, I haven't taken it much further. Partly for that reason, partly because also, as I say, there are many different variations of it. So knowing the right one to speak to the right community, and also, looking as I do it, I mean, people are very friendly actually. Whenever I try and say something in Romani, people are very friendly. The Romani community here is just very often very smiley, very approachable, very friendly, very sweet, and so, I mean, I don't think I would offend anyone. They're just very welcoming whenever I speak to or interact with anyone from that community here. But the reality is, sort of structured class speaking it, getting the practice that I need, and all that kind of stuff, it's a little bit tricky. And I've honestly had other things I've had to do that have taken priority. But I do hope to improve my Romani at some point. Absolutely. J'adore ton titre. Merci. C'est gentil. I've never heard the Scottish version, so interesting. Irish has a phrase, Srágeoga, yeah, Srágeoga, a berlich cliché. Okay. Okay, broken Irish is better than clearer English. That's interesting. Really interesting. When are you going to tackle Cantonese? Who knows? In the future, maybe. I got a real hankering for some of the Chinese languages actually when I was in Southeast Asia at the end of last year. Who knows? Are you a celebrity in North Macedonia? Do they invite you onto the local TV and radio so the Macedonian speaking Englishman. No, I actually don't particularly look for that. We don't have a huge population, and to be honest, it's not something that I really look to do. So yeah, but I definitely, some people remember me quite often because I mean, I look very foreign here, and speaking Macedonian as I do, clearly it sticks out because there aren't that many foreigners that speak it to the level I speak it. I mean, for me, it's been my home language for what, nearly 20 years. It's a long time, and you know, you're talking, that's nearly half my life. So yeah, it's but so there aren't that many people who speak it that well. But no, I don't look for those opportunities. In fact, I have turned a few down. But yeah, just because I mean, I like to just live my life as well. You know, I mean, I don't know what that would mean or look like for me, and so I don't seek it out. Have you any tips for learning Greek? I really like the Click course. That's my kind of favorite go-to recommendation. Click Stalinika, which is Klik, and then Sta, Elinika, Ellinka. Well, in our letters, in Latin letters. But yeah, Click Stalinika, John. That's the one I like. You write click in Latin letters, you'll find it. Click Stalinika. What would be your message to the world, which stands there after 100 years? Oh, wow. I have no idea. There's so much that you could say. I would hope that in 100 years' time, we recognize that the value of every individual is what I hope. And that we're not having these crazy conversations about respecting that people are different from each other. And also that it allows people to be different without sort of feeling that they have to apologize or change, or you know, there are certain situations where I think we, you know, obviously people conform, we have to come together and we have to communicate, so there's always going to be compromise to a degree. It's just the way it is, right? But I do think that we're still quite far away from getting individuality as a species. We're so focused sometimes on groups, it becomes quite tribal. And when I mean tribal, I don't mean it in the good, nice way, but I mean like more like tribal warfare. And I find that can be a bit dangerous for people. I think that, you know, not that we should all be the same, but we should all be our own individuals. And until we get to that stage, I think that where we are right now is where we need to be. You know, identifying with groups and getting the rights, because at the moment we don't have the rights. It's kind of like, you know, you know, I mean, at the risk of sort of people getting very excited, you know, rights and respect and the ability to just be who you are as a certain member of a group, whether that's one part of your life or not. If you don't have that and you're not causing harm to other people in society, as in that's not something that's sort of, you know, we're not talking about the rights of serial killers or something, you know what I mean? We're talking about the rights of people just to exist, and have a fair shot at doing what they need to do in life to succeed, in terms of educational opportunities, employment opportunities for many things, right? And that's not equal in the world. And it's not equal for certain groups because they belong to certain groups. And somebody mentioned the Romani community, and I mean, that's a community that really does suffer quite a lot in the world, and has done for centuries. And people will have different opinions on their experience of certain groups and things like that. But the fact that an individual belongs to one of these groups does not change that individual can be good, can have something to contribute, something valuable, could even help you, could even save your life one day, could do all sorts of great things. And I think my hope is that we reach that tolerance level, that we can tolerate that other people. I'm not saying that everyone has to agree with everyone 100% of the time, but that we all can at least agree that we all have the right to exist in the form that we're in. And that as an extension of that, we get to be individuals who can also succeed in meeting our goals and dreams and hopes and expectations for positive things and for things that are important to us in our lives. So that's kind of what I hope we get to, if that makes sense. It's very difficult to sort of articulate this because I think that, people have very strong feelings on these kinds of things. And my feeling is that I actually wish the very best for for everyone, really. I understand that there are people that are, have been offended, hurt, or whatever else by various different things. My thing is that, look, as an individual, you can't help who you are, but if you're not given the opportunities because you belong to a group or you're seen as belonging to a group, and that group is persecuted or put down in some way because of other experiences of other people, it doesn't quite seem fair. Because how do you break the cycle? Do you know what I mean? How do you break the cycle of not belong? Because you can't not belong to the group that you belong to. But when things are all sort of, we accept that there are differences and that individuals can be different within groups, then I think hopefully we'll get to a better place in terms of allowing people to live their lives. I hope that what I'm saying makes sense to you all. But yeah, that's kind of where I am in my thoughts. So I kind of support everyone's rights to be who they are, as long as you don't hurt the other person. So my rights stop where your nose begins, and your rights stop where my nose begins, in terms of who I am and what I do and how I think. I mean, I have the right to do, and I have the right to think what I want, and so do you. But if that affects, if you want to do something that directly affects my ability to be me, then that's problematic, and I think that's where it becomes problematic. Yeah. Let me see. Do you know Kazakh language? Not really. I've looked at it a little bit, but I don't really know it. I'm looking on the Instagram, by the way. So here we go. Let me see. Thank you for the follows and the likes. Thank you, everyone. I really appreciate it. I'm glad to speak to you about this. I'm very tired of how superficial and political linguists online tend to be. Interesting comment. Yeah, it can be. Look, linguists have got a job that they do. That they basically are the science behind language, right? They describe things. They describe language. That's a linguist. What a linguist does, a description of language in a scientific manner. I put out a video yesterday about dialect and language, and it's a very hot topic in terms of like how people react. This constant labeling or feeling that we need to label, it also works on a group level when it comes to language and dialect. The word dialect is by linguists used fine, quite fine. It's usually just, everything's a dialect, right? In terms of they're all different variations of different languages, dialects, whatever you want to call them, but they're all different, and there's no better or worse dialect. There's one that's more standardized, an agreed standardized dialect of a specific set of dialects that identify as being part of one language.
That's what we're talking about, really. Now, the problem is that sometimes people, including some linguists, will make pronouncements of language and dialect that actually has real life consequences, because the general public does not understand dialect in the same way as a linguist intends it to be used. In fact, it's weaponized, so it becomes deeply problematic. So that's the kind of issue I've seen from linguistic quarters. But in terms of the contributions for other things, they can be really useful. Yeah. Let me see. Oh, dearie me, that was a sneeze and a half. Do excuse me. Very few content creators really challenge the barriers for language learning. Okay, this discrimination, racial and anti-LGBTQ plus is a massive part of my experience. But this sunshine and sparkles I see in, yeah, I think all of the groups that we belong to add to our individuality. And this is where I think that we need to be able to see the beauty in lots of different things. And that's why individuality is so important. Because, look, I mean, me being, I'm British. I'm not going to be able to not be British. I am. And if I dig deeper, I can say, okay, I'm English and Welsh. I'm not going to change that. But me pretending that that's all I am isn't actually an accurate account, because I've lived over half my life in other places, and that's had an impact on how I see the world, how I perceive things, how I've learnt about different things. And so there are things that just change us, and some of the groups that I belong to, some of the things that I identify with, will be the same as other people in that group, and some won't. Some will be diametrically opposed. So yeah, but I think that the beauty is in embracing the elements of those groups, accepting them, and being the stronger individual as a result, in terms of in our acceptance of who we are. And that's not an easy process to go through. I think it can be quite difficult, and very often because of external pressures. It's quite sadly, actually. I feel very, very sad when I see that. Content, okay, let me see. Do you have advice? Oh, do I have advice? Okay, let me see. Sorry, I think I maybe missed the question. I'm sorry. Do you have advice on weathering this painful storm? I think it's finding members of the group that you identify with that have these similar experiences, and talking about it with them. People who are trusted, people who you can talk about that element of your life, and I think that can help. There's definitely a thing about strength in numbers. I get why people band together in groups. I get it. I think where groups are useful is for that reason, and for getting rights and for getting recognition. Where groups can break down, particularly I see this a lot in politics, when people talk about being left or right. I'm like, seriously? I mean, sometimes some things the people on the right say make sense. Sometimes some things the people on the left say make sense. And sometimes neither of them make sense. And as far as I'm concerned, I mean, I'm pretty apolitical in terms of my outlook. I think that most people who are very, very into politics, often in a number of the You know, it's never going to be perfect. So pretending that that just because we say that we're left or we're right, or whatever we are, or center or whatever, I think it can be dangerous in that you then have blinkers. So the things you actually might really agree with might come from a place that you don't identify with, and therefore are scared to be yourself because you're scared of being alienated by the group. And this is where the group thing, I think, is. This is where I say groups are important at the moment where we are in our timeline, but I think that long term we need to be talking about the individual and not being afraid to not agree with everything in a group, to being able and to still identify with elements of, or a lot of elements of, a certain group, but also step out of that and say, actually, do you know what? For that point, I agree with them, or I agree with that. And that's kind of where I am with that. And I think if you can find people who are on the same wavelength for that element of your life and that element of where you are, then that's the key thing. And it's fine to have friends who you talk to about one topic over another, and to have friends for different facets of your personality, because it's highly unlikely that you're going to find one other individual who is exactly your match, perfect match for you as an individual. We're also so slightly different. So yeah, Patchy, what have you missed? You've missed everything. We've talked about everything. Let me see. I'm trying to see through some of the more of these comments. Let me see. Richard, when did you start getting interested in languages? How did you discover love and passion? I was about 5, I guess. I started learning French when I was very young at school, and I used to imitate accents a lot. So I grew up in a part of the UK where there were a number of different accents and quite different accents. So I used to imitate accents a lot. I really enjoy listening and hearing different accents. So yeah, that's kind of my background, and then I just continued learning more languages. But also I have family from Thailand, and so I had that as an influence from the age of about, I can't remember now, I was about 8, I think it was, something like that. How do you a language like? How do you master a language like Russian? Give me some tips, please. That's a long question, and mastering a language is also a discussion in itself. What that means, you need to really truly feel like you've got this ability to master a language. You need to live the language and have the language as part of your life. Please do your favorite regional accent in English. Trying to think what my favorite would be. I think basically it's probably like a northeastern accent like that. I think it sounds very, very nice, pretty good, to the ear. Like, it's really, really pretty. Yeah. I like it when they say pet and different things like that, love. It's really sweet. So yeah, that kind of accent is pretty nice. It's just very, very warm and welcoming, like, So that one I enjoy. And I mean, I've got a real thing for the Northern Irish accent. I think it's just amazing. Like, you can talk to different people, like, and it's got that, I don't know, like the Irish way, the lilt, but it's got kind of an edgy thing to it. So I just think it's beautiful the way they speak as well. I love the vowels. So yeah, there's that too. I guess they're the ones. But then obviously my original accent, the Scouse accent for me, obviously it sounds really warm and dead welcoming, because that's where I'm from. So I mean, this is like a modern, like a new Scouse accent. But then you've got, like, the Thomas the Tank Engine, and the train came to the station, and that's more of an old-fashioned way of speaking Scouse, you know, kind of the different like Ringo Starr type way. Yeah, Black Country Brummie, the Brummie accent. Oh, it's more like that, isn't it? It's quite nasal. So it goes really like I feel it in my head here, you know. Like, and it's really interesting actually the Birmingham accent because you've got like mom, the same mom, and you write mom, M-O-M, like the Americans. Yeah.
Ich möchte Deutsch lernen. Ja, sollst du auch. Ist eine schöne Sprache. Ich finde ich total toll. Naja, mal gucken. Okay, I'm going to try and get to the end of these. Do you know Kazakh language? Okay, I think I answered that question. No, I don't, unfortunately, not very well. I know some words and I've seen it and I've been to Kazakhstan, but I don't speak it. I have got to the end of my questions. Go me. And it's been a really interesting conversation today. I hope that you've enjoyed it and that you've got things that you would like to add or comment on. It would be great to sort of hear. So please feel free to comment, and also remember to give me a like. Remember to subscribe if you haven't subscribed, and it would be lovely to see you again next week. I look forward to it. Cawadal to in Railga. Railga. Tommy following the Ganesh. Le Daniela as Ishiltir. Ja, is Ishiltir ge agus ja gachla gachchila ja gachschachten ja le rangana torfir ja Gerv Maggot. Okay, so thank you very, very much. And I will see you all next week. Have a great end of your weekend or start to your week, and happy language learning. And I look forward to seeing you again soon. If you have any things that you want me to discuss next week, feel free to hit me up on any of the social media channels. And again, if you want to join me and have language learning therapy sessions with me, then I'm very, very happy for you to contact me on Patreon too. And I will speak to you again soon. Take care. All the best. Bye-bye.